In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. One of my great heroes is Sir Ernest Shackleton. And when you look at the story of Shackleton's life, he very much shares many of the strengths of St. Columban. They were both Irish, and there is a certain strength, that we might also say stubbornness, in the Irish character that doesn't give up easily. And Columban was this great Irish missionary, one of the great gifts of the Church of Ireland, not just to the people of Ireland, not just to the people of England and Scotland and Wales, but to the people of Europe. For Columban travelled all over, and the fruits of his missionary labours is so much a part of our heritage today. And Shackleton was also a great traveller, an explorer, and his ship, which he named, was called the Endurance. And it's interesting that today's gospel talks about endurance. Your endurance will win you your lives. The ship Endurance took Shackleton on his many tours and his many expeditions. And if you've never read the life of Shackleton, or don't know anything about him, a good half hour would be well rewarded just to get the basics of his life. Because one of the things about Shackleton was that he was absolutely loved by his men. Truly loved by his men. And he would do anything for his men. In the midst of the most difficult circumstances, Shackleton's leadership, his endurance in the midst of true suffering, was what gave hope to his men. These remarkable journeys, the most remarkable journey of all, when he had to leave his men on the shore in awful conditions, but then get into what was in effect an open boat and travel hundreds of miles to try and find safety and help for them. And eventually, when he came to the island, he was on the wrong side of the island. It was one of these whaling stations, I think South Georgia, I think it was. And he was on the wrong side, so he had to then climb the mountain to get over the top, to get to the whaling station, to get help for his men. And eventually, when they came back on the rescue boat, all of his men were safe because of his work, because of his endurance. Columban had that same spirit, and it was a complete belief in the power of God to help him in difficult moments. And this is what the gospel talks about. You will be hated by all men on account of my name, but not a hair of your head will be lost. Your endurance will win you your lives. So what does St. Columban and what does Ernest Shackleton teach us? The importance that in the midst of the difficulties of life, that we endure. Why would we endure? Because God is with us. God is always with us. God walks with us. And that sometimes in life we look at the things and the challenges that we face, and we think to ourselves, it's too much. We have a sense that the events of life will overwhelm us. Yet Columban shows us that if we are walking in the ways of God, nothing will overwhelm us. All things will endure if we do them in the Lord. And the story of St. Columban is a remarkable story of a missionary endeavour, of this man who travelled all over Europe in the most difficult and dangerous of times. Yet his faith gave him that endurance to face all the challenges. And when we take God to our heart, he is our strength. He is our hope. He is the cause of our endurance. In God, all things are possible. And Columban is this wonderful example of how when you place your trust in the Lord, all things are possible. And so very often when we look at our lives and things look really difficult, our response is, well, it's just impossible. It's impossible for me to do this. It's impossible to me to be faithful. It's impossible for me to endure. It's impossible for me to change. It's impossible for me to do something differently because I've always done it this way. And the fact of the matter is, the word impossible needs to be replaced by the word hard. Impossible means we can't do it. Hard means it demands something of us. Was it impossible for Shackleton to sail in the midst of the South Atlantic in an open boat without any proper equipment to climb that mountain? Was it impossible? Well, it looked like it, didn't it? But he endured. It was hard. It was hard almost to the point that most people looking at that would have said, this can't be done. And in life, we confuse the challenges and we say, it's just impossible. I can't do this. This cannot be done. And then we just put it aside. But you see, with God, all things are possible. In the Magnificat, everything is possible for God. Nothing is impossible for God. Therefore, when we place our trust in him, instead of just saying, I can't do it, we then have this relationship with the God who can do all things. And that's what we need to endure. That's what we need to have hope in. That's what we need to trust God. Because in God, all things are possible in our lives. All things in our relationship are possible in our lives if we turn to the Lord. And no matter what the difficulties, no matter the storms, no matter the trials and the tribulations, our endurance will win us our lives. And so today we give thanks for the example of St. Columban. We give thanks for the example of all those missionaries who, through their endeavours, brought the faith across the world. And we give thanks also to those people who we know who have inspired us by their endurance. Our parents, our families, our friends, those who have stood up to the hardness of life and not run away, who've got into that open boat when the storm was raging and put out to sea because they knew that God was with them. God's blessing on Columban was quite simply, he knew that God would never abandon him. And so for us, we have that same hope, which in the end will give us the strength to endure. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.